often treat knowledge as something given, something measured, something completed. But what if knowledge is not something we receive, but something we choose? There was a time in my life where I had no formal education. I didn't just lose school, I lost access to it completely. I remember sitting with questions that I didn't know how to answer, not because they were too difficult, but because there was no one to ask. No system, no curriculum, no teachers. That felt like limitation. And yet, that was the time I learned the most. At first, that didn't make sense to me, obviously, because I had always believed that learning required a structure, a system, someone to guide you. So when that disappeared, I thought my learning would disappear with it. But it didn't. Instead, something else appeared. Questions that led to responsibility. How do I figure this out on my own? And for the first time, I wasn't learning because I had to. I was learning because I chose to. And that shift made me question something even deeper. What is then actually knowledge? Because today, we live in a world where information is infinite. A search bar can answer almost anything. An algorithm can predict what we want to know. But having access to answers does not equal understanding them. Information is immediate. Understanding takes time. Information is given. Knowledge is built. Our education systems are built on instruction. We're constantly guided, instructed, and evaluated. We're constantly told what to learn, when to learn, and how to prove we have learned it. But having access to those answers doesn't make us knowledgeable. And while that structure is pretty valuable, it also creates a subtle dependency. Because when learning is always directed for us, we slowly lose the ability to direct it ourselves. And if no one teaches us something, we assume it's not meant to be learned. But that assumption only works as long as the structure exists. Because when the structure disappears, something else becomes necessary. Initiative for learning. That is when I realized that knowledge is not based on instruction alone, but it is based on three important things: curiosity, initiative, and challenge. Curiosity is where knowledge begins. Without curiosity, learning is shallow and limited to memorization. Initiative is where learning becomes your responsibility. It becomes your choice. Because no one can assign curiosity, and no one can force understanding. And challenge is where knowledge deepens. Because we don't learn by staying within what is already familiar to us. Real learning begins once things stop being unfamiliar and undoable. And this question becomes more relevant today. Because I think about this, there's another layer to this. Because somewhere right now, someone is as curious, as capable, and even more determined than I am, but she doesn't have access to the same resources. That doesn't mean she lacks potential for knowledge. It only means the path to it is just harder, slower, and less supported. So the matter of access not equaling understanding is true, but having limited resources can also limit how far curiosity can go. And this is becoming more relevant today because our learning and our knowledge is increasingly shaped by technology. It makes me think about how different can learning happen based on what resources are available to us. Because especially now, with artificial intelligence, information can be generated instantly. But the ability to choose what we want to understand still remains human. So the question is no longer, do we have access to knowledge? The real question is, are we willing to take responsibility for it? And if knowledge depends on classrooms, what happens when classrooms disappear? Maulana Balkhi, also known as Rumi, beautifully answers this question by saying, sell your cleverness and buy bewilderment. Cleverness is mere opinion. Bewilderment is intuition. Knowledge is not determined by how much information we have, but it is determined by how willing are we to pursue it. And perhaps the most important education is the one we refuse to stop pursuing. Thank you.